following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back talking Giants baseball in the zone. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and my guest, actually, I'm his guest, is the host, Michael Duca. How are you, sir?
Well, welcome aboard, then. I didn't realize I was captaining this ship.
Oh, you captain every ship. Were you going to leave it to me to captain?
Well, I can
understand.
I can understand your confusion. I have actual scrambled eggs on my hat.
Okay. Well, you've been cooking. Good to talk to you, Michael. It's been a while. It's been, for the Giants, an interesting season, a very, very sad season. Looking back, we lost Willie McCovey, Hank Greenwald. It's horrible. I couldn't think of two more iconic figures in San Francisco Giant history than those two. Two that are, let's put it this way, if not iconic, and they are iconic, two more loved individuals than those two. Does that sum it up?
Well, it does. You forgot, for a patch all year, we also lost Peter McGowan, the man who basically made this conversation possible.
Absolutely. Without Peter McGowan, there would be, at this point, no San Francisco Giants, no AT&T. With that said, the Giants also lost a key member of the front office. Mr. Bear, Larry Bear, was forced into leaving the team for a while, and he lost his captainship. So it's really kind of a crazy year. We've talked about Willie McCovey over the years, you and I, and we've talked about Hank Greenwald, but we really haven't talked about McGowan. And as an old New York Giant fan, he stuck true to that history of the New York Giants with the ballpark, and I'm very appreciative of that. If you walk around the ballpark, there an incredible amount of wall space has been dedicated to the old New York Giants, and he made that possible. How did that come about?
Well, it came about from being a Giants fan as a kid. It came about from him growing up in New York. And frankly, I think it probably came about a little bit because growing up in New York, he saw the outstanding tradition that the Yankees have established with old-timers days and bringing back their old players. And I think he felt that the Giants franchise was probably the cognate or the analog to the Yankees for the National League. I know that the Cardinals have been in a ton of World Series, but really the Giants have, they brought 5 World Championships with them from their New York time, and I think that Peter wanted to establish that tradition in a city that really honors tradition. I mean, San Francisco, you only have to step out on the street and see a cable car rattle by and realize how inefficient they are as a method of mass transit these days. But we pour millions of dollars into maintaining them because there's a tradition there. We were not the only city in the country that had them, but we are now.
Yeah, a good example of that in San Francisco is Lombard Street, which causes an incredible amount of congestion, pollution, this, that, and the other thing. There's nothing that comes back to the city in anything but intangible stuff like you were talking about, tradition. And that's precisely right. The city is very past oriented, and they honor the past. So honoring another city, though, that I think that's great. I'll tell you why. The Mets pay less time thinking about the old days in New York with the New York Giants. And they honor Brooklyn. The Citi Field honors Brooklyn from everything from a stadium that looks like Ebbets Field, but they don't honor the New York Giants. And it's ironic to me that you got to go 3,000 miles to really get an appreciation for.
Well, I'll stop you there. You don't have to go that far to get an appreciation for the Giants. You just have to go to Finnerty's.
Right, the bar in New York, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a San Francisco Giants bar. When the Mets come out to San Francisco every year, Finnerty's brings a group of about 200 Giants fans with them, group tickets to see all three games. It's an annual trip. And I'll tell you something. You walk into Finnerty's wearing a San Francisco Giants World Series ring, you don't buy your own drinks.
You would know, I'm sure.
I can tell you that from experience. From experience.
Nice. Sum up the Giants on the field this year, if you would, a little bit. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The good to me was watching Yastrzemski. Wasn't that cool?
It was. It's a little bit, if you had to pick a theme song, you might go with Michael Jackson's Never Can Say Goodbye. It was a fabulous 5-year ride. Everybody knows that those things are rare. Everybody knows that because they're rare, they're going to end. And this one hit.
Yeah. Boch, were you surprised at the acclaim that he got? Everybody honored him as if he's going directly to the Hall of Fame. Now that assumes something. It assumes that he's done managing. Is he? Oh, did I lose you? I lost you. All right. I guess you're going to have to dial back in, Michael Duca. I'm going to put this thing on hold and identify it as the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all, and the show is The Giants in the Zone. We'll be back in a minute. We are back. Technical difficulties. Michael Duca has rejoined us. We were talking about Yastrzemski. I thought it was the highlight of the Giants season on some levels.
Right, and I was starting to explain that, if the Giants were to have a theme song this year, it might be Michael Jackson's Never Can Say Goodbye. That we had a spectacular 5-year run. I mean, just an amazing 5-year run, unprecedented in National League history, really. And, those are rare for a reason. They're rare because they don't happen often, and that means that they're going to go away. And it's gone. This is a whole different situation now, but there are still some guys left from there, and it's very difficult to think about discarding players who brought you so much prestige, so much joy, so much glory. There was an article that I read not too long ago talking about how if the Giants want to make the next step, they're going to need to look at Mauricio Dubon as their shortstop and see if they can move Brandon Crawford, because Brandon Crawford not only had a terrible offensive year this year, hitting .228, I think, but he had a 0 defensive runs saved year in the field. And
you were so high on him as one of the underrated shortstops, perhaps the best in the National League, as last year, as a matter of fact. So, what a drop off the table.
Right. I mean, you have to wonder if there was a hidden injury that was causing some of this, because, he's mentally tough enough that he's not going to carry his hitting woes out into the field. He's always taken great pride in his defense first. And so to have lost a step of range and, to really not be able, so many balls that he just could not get to this year, something had to be going on. We all decline with age, but we rarely decline that fast, especially if we're athletes. So that's certainly an issue of concern on the downside. And I think we found, if you've been watching the playoffs, I think we found that baseball is just a funny game, period. You cannot make grand pronouncements about somebody on a small sample size. We've known that for years, but it, has it been proven ever any more than it was with Gerardo Parra? I mean, Giants had him and tossed him on the scrap heap after 3 weeks because he wasn't hitting. Nationals picked him up, and he's gonna, get some kind of ring this year, either a National League ring or a World Series ring. And so it's a hit and miss process trying to figure out which older guys you want. There's a huge youth movement going on across baseball. There's a huge youth movement going on with the Giants, and yet the Nationals are the oldest team in Major League Baseball. The Yankees and the Astros, remaining on the other side, are among the top 5 old teams in baseball. You don't think of the Astros that way because you still think of Altuve and Springer and Correa as being kids, but they're not anymore. Altuve's, I think, in his 8th year now.
Wow.
And time flies and we don't. And that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at teams. So, yes, Yastrzemski was certainly a bright spot this year. Mauricio Dubon was a bright spot this year. The guys that were traded for all came in and gave some to a lot of hope for the future. Can the Giants solve Alex Dickerson's perennial physical problems? Can they get him on the field for 140 games a year? If they can, the guy is clearly a 30 to 40 home run threat, depending on which baseball they use next year.
Right. Could be 25.
Could be 25, could be 60. Who knows?
Yeah. And it's amazing the gall of them to use a different baseball in the playoffs. I don't know what that's about.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I am an employee of the Office of the Commissioner, so I'm not going to go on the air and tell you that this or that is or isn't happening. I'm going to tell you that the official line is what it has been for the last 50 years, which is they take a percentage of the baseballs, about 5% from each major run that comes out of the factory, and set them aside for use in the postseason. Now, if you think about that, depending on the conditions that they are stored under, those balls may have an opportunity to dry out and therefore shrink a little bit and therefore have more pronounced seams. It's difficult to figure out which way to go here. You hear about putting balls in a humidor. which plumps up the string that ties them together, which makes the seams a little more pronounced. So I don't know. I don't know the physics of this, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. It is certainly possible. You have colder weather. You have nothing but top-line pitchers throwing. So there are reasons, and typically, why are we upset about this? This is typical playoff baseball. Typically, you have pitching. Low-scoring, grinding games. Pitching and defense dominate.
You're talking about the top 3 pitchers on the top 5 clubs. Mm-hmm. So basically, you're going to be seeing much better pitching than you saw as a sample size during the year. But, like Yogi says, good pitching beats good hitting and vice versa.
The problem is that vice hardly ever beats versa.
That's true. I think the Russians fixed it.
Well, here's the one that you have to think about, Ralph. Here's the thing, we always know that the law of unintended consequences has really sharp teeth and is always aiming for your backside. Well, think about this one for a minute. Next year, the playoffs could look radically different. Next year, you could see, regardless of the baseball used, you could see a slew of 9-6 games. Why? Because they're talking about and apparently getting ready to implement a 26-man roster and only 3 adds for September. So you only have 29 players on the roster in September, and everybody says, what's wrong with that? You play the whole season with only 25 or 26. What's wrong with only 29 in September? What's wrong is you don't have young arms to rest older arms in September to regenerate them for an October push. You're not going to see 7 2/3 out of Anibal Sanchez next year.
Yeah, you're also not going to get to see, and there's an adage, don't fall in love in September or March or whatever that is. But you don't necessarily have to fall in love to see how a player stacks up with an additional year of minor league experience and get an idea of what you can count on next year. I don't think that helps baseball not being able to do that. Helps baseball not to have 12 pitching changes in a game.
Well, I believe that there is a solution to this. Sadly, nobody has asked me.
I'll ask you right now, young man.
The solution is so simple. It's been demonstrated by football. It's been demonstrated by basketball. It's been demonstrated by soccer. You go right ahead and have your 35 or 40-man roster. You name 28 active players each day.
Oh, so you carry around 40 men with you.
Well, you carry around whatever you want. I mean, one of the reasons that teams bring players up in September is that it doubles or triples their salary. And when you start looking at things like the tweet that Tyler Sear put out, where he finished his career he finished his season at AAA Sacramento and wound up winning a national championship at the AAA level this year. But his final paycheck showed that his pay for the year was something like $12,000 or $13,000. You give a kid a month of major league minimum, that's $50,000-$60,000. Maybe more, it might be 70. That's a massive amount of money.
It's almost like big business and the working guy, if you will.
Well, I don't have a problem so much with the disparity, although it would not hurt my feelings for minor leaguers to earn a living wage. I don't see a major issue with that. there's pluses and minuses to everything, Ralph. And if you start saying, okay, we should just double or triple minor leaguer salaries, how much can it be? There's only 20 of them, right? Well, it can be enough that you have to raise the price of your tickets by 15%, and that might mean that kids in Quad Cities, Iowa, don't go to games, or in Omaha, or even in San Jose. I mean, there's a balance to be had here. Minor leagues don't have the ancillary income. Their sponsors aren't Salesforce. Their sponsor is a salesman for State Farm.
Right. Well, let me ask you this then. When you talk about disparity, the 25th man on the roster, well, now the 26th man with the rule change, is going to make a minimum of, what, $500,000 a year?
In that neighborhood. It changes each year, but it's going to be in that neighborhood.
And the guy that was cut with the last roster spot is going to make $15,000 a year.
He may make as much as 40, depending on how much his contract is written. And the other thing that and the other thing you have to keep in mind. I mean, Mr. Sears started his season at Double-A Richmond and spent most of the year there, so that skews the number a little bit. But the other thing you have to keep in mind here is that he did point out, I try to figure out how to live on this amount of money so that I don't tap my signing bonus. These kids do get signing bonuses. They are prorated over a period of time, and the smart ones don't touch that money. They figure out how to.
Well, let me just say,
you're used to being poor. Stay that way.
If you just took America and the 80-20 rule, I would say 20% of the kids are thinking along that line. At most, where do you hear that kind of talk from a recent signee? I respect it. It's wonderful to hear, but you're not going to get that on the
Ralph, we're gonna go down a rabbit hole here, but there's definitely two classes of players in baseball. In America, baseball is becoming more and more a suburban white game. And amongst the kids who come out of white suburbia, you're going to get that kind of thinking because they're going to have family support behind them. To play the game and get recognized and get drafted now, you have to be willing to be on a travel team and play in the area code games and all of that stuff, and all of that is expensive. People are asking, why don't black kids play baseball anymore? Because you can't do it with a taped-up glove and a taped-up bat anymore. You need $3,500 to join a travel team and $5,000 for expenses and uniforms and equipment. Then there's the other class. Then there's the other class of people who make it to Major League Baseball more and more and more, and that is people from around the Caribbean
the Dominican,
Basin.
Around the world.
Well, the Caribbean Basin is really your hotbed, everywhere from Venezuela up around Central America, Mexico, and then back around through Cuba and the Dominican and Curaçao and those areas. So, and those kids, no, they're not going to think that way, but they don't have to think that way. They're used to living on $200 a month. They know how to do it, and they know how to do it and feel okay about it. Not happy, but okay about it because it's what they've seen. It's what they've grown up with.
Right.
Doesn't make it right. I'm not saying it's good to exploit people who've come from poverty. I'm not saying anything like that. Don't misinterpret my words. I'm simply saying they have a skill set in dealing with poverty that suburban white kids don't have.
Yeah, that's true. No question about that. That's but all kids. Baseball is open to poor white kids too. There's a lot of poor white kids that sign.
Well, there are, but you see less American Legion ball, which was sponsored by American Legion Post, who picked up the costs, and more travel teams now, which are a whole different animal. You've got kids that get on buses or even get on planes and go play in tournaments and go play across the country. And sure, you're getting to play against a higher level of competition and you're honing your skills, and all of that's great for the game. But what's not great for the game is the fact that if you don't have $10,000 of disposable income to throw at your kid, who's still only got a 2% chance of making it past AA.
Right. Yep.
There's the dilemma, and this is why there's such a dichotomy in team philosophies. In June, when the draft rolls around, you've got some teams that draft college kids because college kids can come from that pool of poorer kids. They're scouted, and they come out of high school, and they get scholarships to go to college, and they spend at least 3 years learning their craft. And then there are other teams that want high school kids because they're cheaper and they're younger and you can control their development for 3 years. But, I sit with the son of a former major league player most of the time when I'm up in the press box. I sit with F.P. Santangelo Jr. He is, he's a producer for KNBR Radio, but obviously knows the game, played the game himself, not at a high level, but played the game himself, and has strongly held and strongly supported positions about the game. And, he says that, in his opinion, all the smart organizations are drafting college players because college, you have 12, maybe 15 top-level players on a team, and you might have 4 or 5 coaches. So they're getting 1-on-3 instruction or better. And they're getting constant instruction through 3 years of development, where he says in the minor leagues, you've got a roving pitching instructor who, is in town for a day, and if you're not pitching on that day, he doesn't talk to you.
Good point. Good point. They're getting better instruction in college.
Now, the flip side of that, which I answered, I told him, but what about guys like Cliff Gustafson at Texas, who cranked out major league prospect after major league prospect after major league prospect, virtually all of whom broke down after a couple of years in professional baseball because he overused them. And he said, well, yeah, you do have that. The top programs, the pitchers that come out of the top programs are frequently going to be overused and abused and break down. There's no way around that because the research has shown that you don't want a kid to have more than 300 to 400 competitive innings on his arm when he hits his 21st birthday. Because the shoulder capsule, the shoulder capsule has not knit yet, and it's not strong enough to sustain that kind of sustained effort. And perhaps the best example of that, and the guy who really kicked off the research and made people look back at the numbers and figure this out, was Nolan Ryan. Now, you are an old Mets fan, so you remember Nolan Ryan came up with the New York Mets in 1969, and he was terrible. He made Ryan Duran look like a finesse pitcher.
It wasn't that bad, but
it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. His walk to strikeout ratio was close to 1-to-1, even though he was striking out 10 guys per 9 innings. And so he didn't get used much. If I remember correctly, in that World Series season, he threw fewer than 70 innings. And the next year, he didn't throw very many innings. And he had fewer than 200 competitive innings on his arm at age 22. And he pitched until he was 104.
That he's the poster boy for that sort of research. That's beautiful.
And I wish I could take credit for that, but I can't. I'm gonna refer people. You're probably gonna have to buy a used copy of it, but there's a book called The Diamond Appraised, co-written by Tom House, the old pitching coach, and Craig Wright, one of the original Bill James sabermetricians. And it's a fascinating read, Ralph. I mean, you would love it, because they take subjects about pitching in particular, and each of them writes a chapter on the subject from their point of view. And it's Craig House who came up with this notion, and it was Nolan Ryan who sparked him looking into it, but then he found just stacks of examples like that.
Whoa. Have organizations caught on to this? Are they talking about that?
I highly doubt it. For the following reasons. The book was written almost 25 or 30 years ago. And you can say yes, because they are, you are highly pitch count limited in the minor leagues. Nobody ever throws a complete game in the minor leagues, not even a 7-inning complete game. And typically, a minor league pitching staff, you go down to, like, say, a Class A level in San Jose, High A, Cal League is a pitcher's league, and it's not uncommon for a team to have 6 starters in the rotation. They baby these kids. They're saying, well, they're college age, so we're going to pitch them like they're college pitchers. They're going to get to throw once a week. That's how colleges construct their staffs. You have your major league prospect is your Friday starter, your marginal prospect is your Saturday starter, and your organizational guys are your Sunday starter.
Well, does that go along with just the maximum a guy will ever pitch is 7 innings? There are no complete games anymore, and there's nothing said about building a kid's arm up, the strength of an arm. That's not talked about anymore.
Well, your 69 Mets are one of the culprits. They were the ones who brought up Gary Gentry from Arizona State in May of 1969 and introduced the 5-man rotation. Until then, until then, pitchers threw every 4th day. And by throwing every 4th day, you would throw on Monday, you would ice and rest on Tuesday, you would throw between starts on Wednesday, rest on Thursday, you'd throw on Friday. It was a nice, simple routine. Now you've got an extra off day thrown in there. Some guys throw on the 2nd day after they pitch. Some guys throw on the 3rd day after they pitch. There's no sense of routine to it. There's no familiarity. You go from one organization to another. They may want to change your throwing day. And you're right. Nobody builds up kids' arms anymore. But you have to look at the whole picture. Why are the minor leagues there? They're not there to develop starting pitching. They're there to develop baseball teams. So, sure, there are no complete games anymore, because what is everybody looking for? Everybody's looking for a string of 20-year-old relievers who can throw 101 miles an hour. You don't build those guys by having your starters throw complete games.
Very good point.
What do you want?
The chicken or the egg?
What came first was the ring. winning the ring always comes first. And then your organizational philosophy of how you win that ring determines everything after that. You know, the Milwaukee Brewers, obviously, the last couple of years have had the organizational philosophy of we'll throw some guys out there, get 5 innings out of them, and if we have a lead after 5, you're dead because we've got just a parade of guys who can throw 96 and up. And each one that comes out of the bullpen throws harder than the guy who was there before him. On the other hand, you get teams like the Washington Nationals who are about to embark on their first ever franchise World Series with a bullpen that can at best be kindly described as a lick and a promise and a lot of prayer.
Right, and they're going to make it to the World Series.
They are in the World Series, and they're in the World Series because they're in the World Series. You know, and yet last night, my wife and I were watching the game. We were talking about it, and I said, you know, there's a stark difference in managing styles when you watch Dave Martinez. First of all, you know, even though he had something like 97 pitches, I would have sent Patrick Corbin out to start the 7th inning. I would have told him with a 4-run lead, you pitch until somebody gets on base. Shorten the bullpen as much as you can in a game like that. Then, number 2, when they brought Doolittle in as early as they did, I said, you know, again, you have to ride this until you put somebody on base. You don't look at lefty-righty matchups. You don't look at anything except success at this point. This is a clinch game. You clinch this game, you got a week to rest everybody, which is why number 3 in the 9th inning, after Daniel Hudson had a stressful 8th inning, there's no way I don't have Scherzer and Sanchez both warming up in the bullpen.
I was just going to say, you got those guys.
I got to pitch for a week.
Got a week for them to recover. They're your best pitchers.
If you win and you're sitting on a 4-1 lead in the 9th inning, you may not have a better chance to win ever again at home. You know, you have everybody ready. You have all the fire engines on alert, lights going, engines started.
Right.
So that there shows you that, you know, that's a rookie manager in the playoffs. I mean, there is no way that Bruce Bochy wouldn't have had, you know, he might not only have had Bumgarner and Kane throwing in the bullpen, he would have had Lincecum throwing under the stands.
That's very good. Speaking of Bochy, I asked you when we broke up a little bit and we had technical problems. I asked you, were you surprised at the acclaim and the love that Bochy received all around the league, supposedly retiring? Is he going to retire? Is there an outside chance he'd manage somewhere else?
Well, the answer to both of those questions, the answer to all 3 of those, well, first of all, was I surprised at the acclaim he received around the league? A little bit. But the only reason I say a little bit is that he has a fairly bland and predictable public personality. But in private, if you get to know him, the guy's got a wicked sense of humor. And so, no, it didn't surprise me. Second of all, retired and will he manage again? The answer to both of those questions is yes. He is retired. Is there a chance he'll manage again? I can give you the weasel answer to that and say, of course there's a chance because he's going to do the French national team of the World Baseball Classic. But you're asking a more direct question, is he going to manage in the major leagues? I don't think so. There's a couple of clues. One of them is how he kept talking about we've got to get this guy going. We've got to get this guy developed for next year. We've got that makes it pretty clear that he's of himself still as a member of the Giants organization. Number 2, the Giants are thinking of him as a member of the Giants organization. I believe he will wind up re-signing with them in a different capacity. He may take over Dusty's capacity if Dusty manages the Phillies. Except he won't have to go watch Dusty's kid play every week. Number three, he directly told me, I asked him point blank in his office when I said goodbye to him at the end of the season. I said, will we see you managing the Padres next year? And he laughed and he said, not that I know of. Don't see that happening. So, and, if he's going to come back anywhere, he's going to...
What a fit that would be. Wow.
Well, if he's going to come back anywhere, that's where he's going to come back. I mean, the man is ready to sit on his ranch and go fishing. And, the only place he might be willing to work is San Diego because for home games, he'd truly be home. But he really, as much as he loves getting on a boat and going albacore fishing and all of that, after 13 years, he kind of thinks of himself as a Northern Californian now.
Oh, nice to know. Nice to know. Think of the managers the Giants, former managers the Giants still get use out of. Dusty, Felipe. There's one more that slips my mind. That's maybe not, but those two guys play an integral part in advising the home office.
Well, here's a number that you have to pack away and chew on. Felipe managed for 4 years. The last 3 Giants managers managed for 26 years. The last 4 have managed for 35 years. We only had 4 managers in 35 years.
Wow.
Roger Craig, Dusty Baker, Felipe Alou, Bruce Bochy. That's why this selection is a bigger deal than people make it out to be. That's why they're not, why they didn't even ask to interview a 68 or 69-year-old Joe Madden.
I had assumed...
Who is signing with the Angels, by the way. He's going to sign a 3-year deal later today. You threw one at me that surprised me. Dusty with the Phillies. I thought the Phillies... No, they already... they already fired... What's his name? Gabe Kapler. They not only fired Gabe Kapler, he's interviewing in San Francisco. But, let's chew on this for a minute. Think about teams that have had long droughts getting to the World Series. Giants, Cubs,
right.
Nationals. Who's the common thread?
Giants, Cubs, Dusty?
Yep. Got every one of those teams ready to win.
Yeah. Very good point. Is there a chance he'd manage the Mets?
I don't know. Is there a chance the Mets would ask? They're not known for making moves.
God knows. I can attest to that as a fan.
I hate to be so blunt knowing you're a fan, Ralph, but, they don't have an extended history of brilliant personnel hires.
No, they don't. I wish they would have gone back to, I had wished last year they went back to the, and I can't think of his name, general manager with the Mets, Latin guy from New York.
Mike Rizzo?
No.
Omar Minaya?
Omar Minaya. I have a lot in common with him. We were both super seniors at Newtown High School, which means we didn't graduate with our class. Whatever his reasons were, I know what my reasons were, and it wasn't exceptional intelligence. But there's a difference between being exceptionally intelligent and being baseball-wise, as I've come to find out. He was a great general manager. They should have gone back to him. They should have stuck with him. Speaking of bad decisions with the Mets, I think they could do a lot worse with Dusty, then Dusty, as a manager.
Yeah, it remains to be seen.
Henley Mullins, wasn't he groomed to be the next Giant manager?
Hensley Mullins is, and Ron Wotus has been in the
radio man. I'm just talking to myself.
And Ron Wotus too has been in the organization forever. I mean, nobody knows the organization better. I saw a tweet the other day from Tony Siegel, who's been, a part of the Sabian front office group forever and ever and ever. And he said, nobody knows the organization better. Nobody's been more loyal. Nobody deserves a shot more than Ron Wotus, who has won championships as a minor league manager. It was a long time ago now because he's been on the major league staff for over 20 years. But still, he has managerial experience, and he is an analytics guy, and he's accepted analytics, and he's used them for years. My concern with him is really very simple, and that is that it would take an extraordinary amount of courage on the part of Farhan Zaidi to accept the job, to say, okay, we're going to change the organization, we're going to rebuild, we're going to turn the culture inside out, and then hire from within. I think that would just take an extraordinary amount of courage. And especially it's your first hire, you're going to be more likely, I think, to go with somebody unknown so that if it works, you look like a genius, and if it doesn't, you say, well, we gave a guy a chance. If you hire from within, it's going to be, well, you knew what you had, and if it doesn't work out, it's on you.
There's the one intangible about hiring from within. It gives everybody working in the organization that came up right behind these guys hope that they can in turn be eligible, and I think it keeps the organization going, hiring from within. Plus, there's no replacement for a guy a manager knowing what his players can do and having experience with them along the lines. You know who those guys are because they produced in the minors for you. Some guys produce when the game's on the line. You can take your analytics, and I don't know if that shows it, but it's true, and a manager knows when he looks into a player's eyes. Can't replace that.
I'm going to remind you, we're going to go back to 1993, and I'm going to remind you that Dusty Baker, who had been the major league hitting coach, was promoted to manager, and the first thing he did was tell Bob Lillis, you're not going anywhere. You're going to be my bench coach. Lillis was under consideration for that managerial job, and Dusty was smart enough to keep him there. Good managers surround themselves with people smarter than they are. And I say all of that by way of saying that if Farhan decides, to go with, let's just pull a name out of the hat, someone that they have interviewed, but someone who has no managerial experience and someone that nobody in the Bay Area has ever heard of. Let's say they go with a guy from the Kansas City organization, Pedro Grifol. They have interviewed him. He is a strong candidate. He's a young guy. He's an analytics guy. He's been, I believe, a bullpen coach. He knows pitching. But if you go with a young guy like that with no experience, it is not unusual for a general manager to tell him for the first couple of years, you've got to keep Mullins and Wotus on board because they know the organization.
Okay.
So,
that guy
so you're not
Felipe's
necessarily
son, Rojas.
I'm sorry?
Ever talk about him?
Who?
Felipe has a son named Rojas, and he's getting interviews. His last name is Rojas, not a Lou, because that's...
Well, that has to do with the fact that in Hispanic culture around the Caribbean, players carry both their mother's and father's last name. And they tend to, and as their last name, they tend to go by. I mean, let's put it this way. The most famous Giants pitcher possibly of all time, Juan Marichal, that's not his name.
Yes.
His name is
really?
Juan Antonio Marichal Sanchez. Marichal was his matronymic name. So, it's...
Felipe's son is rumored in a number of places. I think he had an interview with the Mets, a phone interview with the Mets, and I just wondered if that was ever a rumor around the Giants.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean a thing. That's just not that I know of.
All right. Well, you know an awful lot more than you let on. Not to me. You're perfectly candid with me. And the same, you said something about that a good manager will always surround himself with people who are smarter than him. And the same holds true for podcasters. So thank you for being you and handling the San Francisco Giants in the zone for the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Thank you, Michael. Good talk today.
Always a pleasure, Ralph. Always a pleasure.
I really enjoy your company. We'll meet up at Nations before you know it, and we'll drive out to the old NAS base, and we'll kind of make sure the Russians don't sneak up on us in the middle of the night.
Sounds like a fair idea. It's the off season, so Monday through Thursday, I'm typically available for lunch. Anybody out there wants to take me out?
Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to get, as we did last time, we're going to get Jerry Feidelberg, another Alameda native, and a big part of the Comfortably Zoned network. And you, and I'm buying at Nathan's. What a sport I am, huh?
All right. I'm in.
All right, sir. We'll keep in touch in the next few days. And I just want to thank everybody for listening. Do us both a big solid. If you enjoyed this or any of our offerings, box up some lightly used or new children's books and take them down to the Head Start program wherever you live. Kids need to read, they need to get their imagination going, and they need to be school ready. The kids at the Head Start need it more than anyone. So if you do that, it would really make me feel good. I know it would make Michael feel good. Talk soon, everybody. Thank you. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.